Last night I actually slept better, so I'm doing a quick segment to say that I did some coherence breathing, about half an hour of it before I went to sleep, and I also tried to visualize people that I care about, and I didn't have any of the scary heart stuff, even though my heart rate did spike because I did wear my heart rate monitor to bed with the cardio mood app, so I saw that it did, but I didn't experience anything, so that's good. Yesterday I also made a smoothie with some hawthorn powder in it because that's really good for the heart. So again, I'm making a smoothie with banana, hawthorn powder, moringa powder, coconut milk, and honey, and a bit of cinnamon, and it's pretty good. So today the Hearty Nutritionals amino acids should arrive, and I'll take that, and I'll talk to myself later. So I just checked the mail, and I did get my Hearty Nutritionals balanced freeform aminos, and they said to take it 3 times a day, 2 each time, before meals on an empty stomach. And I ate maybe an hour and a half ago, so I think I'm safe to take 2 right now, and then I'll go eat my meal, which is ice cream. Bottoms up. I started reading Dr. Mercola's book, Fat for Fuel, and I did have ice cream for dinner. So I'm not really on that wavelength yet. I did do a vegetarian ketogenic diet for probably 6 to 8 months, and I thought that it would be something that would help to protect me from psychosis, but it didn't turn out that way. I still ended up in the psych ward in April of 2016, and that's when I stopped the ketogenic diet because they don't offer ketogenic diets in the psych ward, so I just ate the psych ward food. But I did do it for quite a long time, and I did notice that I wasn't hungry. I was able to stay very slim, and I liked it. So I'm reading this book because I do think that I would like to try another high-fat, low-carb, low-protein diet again, probably when I go back home. And I've read the first 4 or 5 chapters of the book, and there's some interesting information. One thing he mentions is how high iron is actually a problem, and it's fascinating the way he talks about this and what he emphasizes. And he was talking about how people who donate blood are actually at lower risk for a lot of diseases because they're getting rid of the excess iron in their body. And I won't go into all that he talks about, but I just found that interesting because when I was doing really well for 3.5 years before I had any form of so-called relapse, I was donating blood. I did it probably 3 or 4 times. And yes, you can donate blood when you're on many of the different psych meds, interestingly enough. And so I'm thinking when I go back home I will donate blood again, even though my iron's usually on the low side because I'm a vegetarian, but it still could be good in some way. So I took that as a tip from the book so far, and he hasn't really gotten into the diet stuff yet planned because it's not about ketogenesis as much as it is about repairing mitochondria, getting them to start to repair, rebuild, and get rid of the ones that aren't functioning. And I did have quite a bit of energy when I was eating that way too. So I might try it again sometime, and that's why I bought the book on Kindle. And he mentioned an app in there called Google Keep, and he said that he had to start using it because he was so clear mentally that he was always having lots of ideas. And so this was a way for him to jot it down. And I was thinking about how I've been looking for an app that does that kind of thing. So when my brain is in hyper insight mode, I can keep track of them. So I'm going to try out that app. And tonight I'm going to take one more dose of the amino acids from Hardy Nutritionals. And I will also do probably about half an hour of coherence breathing, which is the coherence training app. And then you need some form of heart rate monitor. I have this one. It's just a chest strap that goes around right here on your bare skin, and then has these electrode-y things that you just get a little bit damp and then put it on. And I even sleep with this thing on with the cardio mood app just to see if there's spikes in my heart rate when I'm falling asleep. And I talked about before, it almost feels like a bit of a hug. So it feels like I'm paying attention to my heart, and in that way maybe it settles down a little bit too. I'm hoping to have 2 good nights in a row of sleep, because sometimes when this little fluttery thing starts, then it could lead to a larger spike of scariness. And if that larger spike happens again, I'll definitely be heading home. And I have written down some stuff, and I'll talk a little bit about it. And I still have 2 other notebooks that I haven't really delved too much into. And I feel quite settled with going at the pace of whatever. And I wrote down, you can only understand it by living it, in terms of this whole altered states thing. The understanding is in living in those states and not really in talking about it so much. And I wanted to emphasize to myself again the example of how we need a little bit of vision in order to create the visual structures in the brain. In the example of how in experiments they close the eye of a kitten in utero, and that side of the brain's visual cortex didn't develop. So in that way, if we close our eyes to these other states and what they're showing us, it's actually not developing those structures in the brain. But each time we go into those states, it's kind of like being in a womb of some other dimension. And if we can go into it with eyes open and really wondering, then those structures get created in our brains. It's part of the brain metamorphosis. The brain isn't going to change without the perception of something else to perceive, just like there needs to be some vision in the kitten in order for the visual cortex to develop in the brain. Well, whatever this is trying to develop in the brain, call it the map cortex or something like that. It's mapping another dimension, and we need to not ignore it because that dimension is there, and the more it can get mapped in more brains, the more it will be perceptible and we'll have the ability to navigate it. And it could even happen that once a certain number of people develop that ability to navigate, it might just arise in other people, kind of like the 100th monkey syndrome, without people having to go through all of this trial and error and trouble that it leads to at this point. So we are pioneering brain change. So in talking about how there is no self, there is no me thinking thoughts. We're more like thought filters. And by picking up on certain thoughts over time, we've created those brain cells to continue filtering those thoughts. And that creates the illusion of a me. And I feel like sometimes brains get into contact with filtering even more thoughts. And then when that happens, it tends to blow out these thought structures. Or when there's more thoughts that are outside the domain of the me, then all of a sudden one is in contact with something more than just the me. And one starts to question the me because one realizes one has never thought these things before, so where did they come from? Because they didn't come from past memory. But really, there is no me, so it could even be a matter of how most of our thoughts come from memory. And then if this changes in that we're getting thoughts that aren't coming from memory, it sort of challenges the whole me thing, kind of what it does. It's like a current flowing from the past to the future, and then another current flowing a different way at messing up that current, and all of a sudden the current that gives rise to the me is changed, and all of a sudden what is there? It's not really a me. It's almost like we've reached the brink of thought energy, that something else has to come in. And even Dr. David Bohm said in his interview with David Suzuki that we need a new form of information. We need a new source of information. And I think this process is part of that. The trouble is it challenges the notion of me, which is what we hold most dearly. And when we're in those altered states of map consciousness, we're in a state of perception and action. And I feel like we need to continue to use that in service of Gaia, or we lose it. So if we can use perception action in service of Gaia, then we're moving in the right domain. So we get in touch with a different movement of mind, matter, and thought. It's a different current. So normally we have mind and thought coming from the past to meet the present matter. But in this other state, mind and thought are definitely moving in a different direction. They're moving with matter. It's meeting matter in the moment and moving with it instead of meeting it and dividing it up based on past stuff. So now I'm on to a notebook, and then I have to go back to my old notebook, which I'm probably still talking about stuff related to Dr. Daniel Siegel, but I can't remember. And when I go back home at some point, I might go through some of my older notebooks because I was in a pretty good manic state at some point, and I think I wrote more positive airy-fairy stuff, which could be interesting, and then still going back to the very beginning and talking about some of the things in there. I'm mostly looking for things that are themes I'm talking about now, 6 years later, and in a way it's sort of like a lot of the stuff I wrote was kind of mumbo-jumbo-y, and then some of it is still kind of true today in terms of what I feel and see in these states. And in that way, those are the memes that have some trajectory from previous states. So I think this stuff is regarding the self or lack thereof. And I think I'm losing my voice from eating too much ice cream. It kind of bothers my throat, but it's worth it. And I wrote down that can the appearance go through steps to overcome the appearance? And that's relating to how the self is kind of an appearance. It's not really there, but it appears as a result of the process of thinking, kind of like a mirage isn't really there, there's no water on the horizon, but it appears from that process. So if the self is really only an appearance or an illusion, or however one wants to say it, how can that illusion go through steps to overcome the illusion? And if it is an appearance, then who is it appearing to? And whatever it is that it's appearing to, is that a bit more fundamental than the self itself? And I believe I already talked about map as proprioception of the self. In map consciousness, we can really see the self and what it's doing, but we don't understand or realize that we're the seer. We're still identified with what that stuff is doing as if it's us who's doing it. And it's kind of scary to see that at a certain level there is no free will. And I think I talked about that stuff at some point. I think I might have talked about some of this stuff. Wrong meaning destroys the brain. This is the human brain talking, not the me. And thought, in a way, is a form of homeostasis. It's consistency, but it's consistency to the patterns of society that would have us be cogs in an economic machine. And the body has proprioception in that when we walk, the body is aware of itself, so it can walk. But when we think, we don't necessarily have proprioception of thought unless we're in map consciousness. And again, it's really important to drop all those things that we see, and they get dropped by seeing them but not identifying with them and not playing with them. And thought, in a way, is an appearance in consciousness because we're not living in harmony with this other thing, this other dimension. This other dimension is really just living. It's a living thing, whereas our thought structures are patterns. So why is the material process of the brain used to create all this? There is a meaningful world, but we have to create that. Instead of creating things based on these past patterns, we have to really see what's actually meaningful and create that. And thought and the self and the me, in a way, is a reflex conditioned by society. Society is a reflex, and map dissolves some of that reflex as meaningless. And then sometimes we become sort of non-functional because society is what tells us what functioning is, when maybe human beings are supposed to be used for a different functioning altogether. Are we really meant to be trained to do the same thing for the rest of our life every day, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? I don't think so. So this energy comes in map consciousness and breaks that all up. And then we need medication to keep the brain in a lower energy state. And that lower energy state is what perpetuates the reflex. If we had that energy all the time, there's no way we could stay in that reflex. And the dulling, tranquilizing medication makes sure that that continues on. And thought is what arises when the brain is not moving with the now. When the brain cells are static, in that they're just full of static noise from the past. And that is what is moving in the brain when it's trying to meet the now, which is very complex, diverse, intricate, and we could be really with that, but we're too busy, lost in our static. Somewhere else than now is incoherent static. The past is incoherent static. It's a pattern. So it's a question of brain pliability. And when we're aware of everything, we don't create a self. So there's thought and the me because we're not moving harmoniously with Gaia. So even people that are functioning well in society now, we're all malfunctioning relative to Gaia. And Gaia is creating some of us as malfunctioning, relating to society, hoping that we'll at least be seeds of something new. And that's why it's our responsibility to really get with our perceptions and attempt to be on Gaia's side. When we don't want to live anymore, when we attempt suicide, it's because we don't want to live in this society. We don't want to live in this world the way it's created. But when we opt out, then we're responsible for co-creating and being on Gaia's side and moving with that. And it's a creative process. It's not something that we can lay a pattern out for.